Have you ever spoken just in conversation to anybody? Either it be a director or somebody higher up than you in the organization or lower in the organization? Did you feel a sense of tenseness in your body? For example, if you were to speak to the President of the United States, would you not be a little bit nervous? If it was like a conversation, like a real conversation, not like a hi, nice to meet you, but a real nice conversation. My question I've asked is this: what goes on with the body and brain while you're having the conversation? What goes on when you're speaking in public? What goes on when you're talking to a regular person? How does this all work together? Because speaking is a very complicated thing, because you have to speak with words that everybody can understand in a precise way. And then you have to understand what the other person is speaking and then explain your reasoning behind it and explain what you're thinking on terms of their idea. So you're adding to their idea or subtracting to their idea, and these all are communicated in words or sentences written out. And this is the brain. So when the brain functions, it's not as compartmentalized as scientists think. It's more like a big jumbled mess that does have compartments, but at the same time, it's all working together. So, for example, some people have learned to use the right side of their brain for left brain activity, or left brain activity for right side of their brain. If you're right-handed, then most likely then you're going to use your left side of your brain for very analytical kind of things. And that's where speaking and writing come into play. So let's start with just basic neuroscience. And this is something discovered in the late 1800s. And it comes from Paul Broca and Carl Wernicke. And they both discovered two separate things. Paul Broca, a neuroscientist, discovered that he had a patient that he could only say 10. His only word in his vocabulary was 10. But if you spoke to him, he would understand everything you were saying. So if you said, hey, go grab a drink of water, go do this, why don't you climb a mountain, he could understand all of these things. But what he couldn't understand was, or what he couldn't do was write or speak. And the reason why is because Broca's area of his mind, or his brain, was damaged. So after he died, he examined that his brain, this part of the brain, was damaged, and that he could understand everything, but he couldn't write it down or he couldn't communicate out. At the same time, Carl Wernicke had a different patient that he could explain perfectly grammatical sentences that mean absolutely nothing. And it's called word salad. So I can't even understand what this means, but he says perfectly grammatical sentences, but they mean nothing in context, they mean nothing in terms of what he's trying to explain. His ideas are meaningless, essentially. And the reason why is because the Wernicke's area of his brain did not function. So he could compose great sentences, but he couldn't understand language at all. And after he was born, that area of the brain was damaged. Now these two areas, as far as speaking in public and speaking person to person, work as a cycle. So it's a cycle of understanding language and composing language. Understanding language and composing language. And it goes back and forth, back and forth. So for example, when I speak publicly, this part right here hurts a lot. I don't know if anybody has had that kind of thing happen, but like something in your brain is like trying to think a lot and is almost an overload. Like you can feel parts of your brain function as you speak in public. Okay, so that's person-to-person speaking, and that's mind. That's what happens when you compose and understand sentences. Something else happens entirely when you speak in public or when you're speaking to somebody in power or you feel this sense of nervousness. That happens when your hypothalamus gland, when that senses danger. So when you have a flight or fight kind of sense, then what happens is that it goes to your pituitary gland and then to your adrenaline cortex, which is what gives you adrenaline. So when you have that fight or flight kind of mode, or like when you're in an athletic event or you're performing, that's what makes you feel very nervous. And everybody experiences a different kind of nervousness. So some people, there's a lot of adrenaline that pumps out, and some people feel more nervous than others. Some people get up here and they're like, okay, this is not a big deal. I can speak in front of people. Maybe it's because their body doesn't give as much adrenaline as other people. So when you feel that sense of nervousness, you come from normal standing up straight, perfect posture, to leaning down in a low power kind of position, to where you feel more cramped up and you don't feel empowered to explain the things you need to explain. And that's all part of body language. So let's give a quick example. Winston Churchill, one of the best orators of modern era. I feel like he is probably one of the top 3 in almost all of history. And why? Is because of, I feel like, 2 things. He was a leader in a time when it was very intense. So when he's speaking, there's a lot of adrenaline rushing through. He's talking about World War II or talking about very serious topics. Top of that, he gave great speeches off the cuff and written out. Like, for example, here, if you look, his posture is just perfectly, it seems very natural. He's speaking with one hand and probably to a radio and a host of people. He doesn't have anything in front of him, but he's just speaking his mind, essentially. There are 3 different ways that you can improve the way that you speak. And it essentially comes from practicing and preparing, because the more times you practice and prepare, the more you know it. And the less adrenaline goes to your glands and the more confident you feel. More confident you feel, the more you can explain subjects and the more you can explain topics. So if you're in front of that senior vice president or the president of the United States, then you can feel very confident, hey, I can speak to him because I've spoken to tons of other people. So the more times you practice your speaking, then the more you can speak in general, and the more you can engage in other kinds of conversation. It essentially expands your view. The second is relaxing before speaking. Some people go through mental exercises or visual exercises when they go through athletic events. This is the same with speaking. If you can visualize, okay, I can visualize the room. I'm speaking in front of the room. It's calm. I'm in control. Like, all of these things have to go through your mind in order to give a great speech. So if you're in front of 1,000 people, then the better speech you give is one where you prepare and you practice right where you're supposed to. So if you're speaking in front of thousands of people, might as well go to that stage and practice there, because you're going to be there the next day anyway. And the third is accomplish more speeches. So the more you learn to speak, the more speeches you compose, then the more you can learn how to speak. The more you speak, the more you practice, and it builds on top of another. For example, when I started a year ago, I noticed that there are some places, even in person-to-person conversation, where I wasn't being precise as I wanted. But as I learned to speak publicly, those things on top of speaking publicly added to my speaking ability. So for example, I'm able to carry a conversation with somebody else on something normal day conversation, but I feel more in control because I've spoken in public and I've spoken to more people. So it's having that control when you speak. So when you're speaking in public, just remember these 3 things. Remember that your brain is working in a complicated way, and if you can understand how to manipulate it, then maybe you can be a better speaker overall.